welcome everybody to episode number 15 of the Ear to the Canvas podcast. This is your host, Ryan Truland. UFC 251 somehow got even more intriguing over the weekend. We got a lot of answers. There's still some questions, though. Definitely a lot of questions. Things are still up in the air regarding the event. If we're going to get into all of the crazy stuff. So, quick timeline. July 3rd, day before the 4th of July. Early in the day, we get that Gilbert Burns, who is scheduled to face Kamaru Usman the following Saturday at UFC 251 main event, Fight Island, tested positive for coronavirus, forced to withdraw from his first title opportunity. He was devastated, of course. Nothing he can do, though. It sucks. He will get another chance. Absolutely. So, it was mayhem after that. People, no idea what was going to happen. Obviously, the names that were thrown out there were Colby Covington, Jorge Masvidal, Leon Edwards to an extent. But mostly just Covington and Masvidal were the contenders. They came out and said that they would want to fight. And then the next day, Masvidal said that, actually later that day, on that Friday, he got the call. And Masvidal and Usman... So Masvidal and Covington stepped up. Masvidal gets selected. They agreed to terms. This is all over the weekend. They moved very fast with this. And Masvidal slid into that main event slot to take on Kamaru Usman for the 170-pound belt. A fight that is going to do more pay-per-views than the previously scheduled fight. Masvidal versus Usman will actually do more pay-per-views than Burns versus Usman would have. So, kind of crazy. You don't see that often where option A gets thrown out the window and then option B becomes option A and is actually going to generate more revenue. That's pretty wild. Usman opened up as a minus 300 favorite over Masvidal, who is a plus 240 underdog. They call him game bred for a reason. It's because he's game. Of course, he had been dealing with the contract negotiations, the dispute there between him and the UFC, him wanting more money. But they figured it out on Ariel Helwani's podcast or on his show. Over the weekend, Masvidal joined him, and he said a lot of interesting stuff on that podcast. Gonna get into some of it. One of the things he said is that he got very close to the number he was asking for this fight, which is interesting. So that means that Dana White and the UFC, of course, bent out of desperation, more than likely. They needed a main event. They needed somebody to step up. Scrapping that fight would have been a huge disappointment. It's the first fight on Fight Island, which is just a legendary moment for the sport. Scrapping the main event would have sucked. And so they, out of desperation, they wavered the UFC and got close to what Masvidal was asking for. So contract negotiations in the end worked out for Masvidal. He said a couple other interesting things on that show with Ariel. He also said that if he wins the belt, he's interested, two guys that he's interested in fighting that he named, and both of them were pretty interesting. It wasn't Colby Covington. It wasn't Leon Edwards, who he had that exchange with backstage after that fight with Till. Neither of those guys. He wants to rematch Nate Diaz. He feels that the fans got robbed when that fight was stopped due to the doctor stoppage. I've said right along, I'm not clamoring. I'm not one of those guys clamoring to see that rematch. I'm really not. I think it was cool when it happened, the fight, the BMF belt. I thought it was cool. I thought it should have been a one and done. It did suck. It really did, how the fight ended. Doctor stoppage in the baddest motherfucker fight. It's kind of ironic and disappointing. But I've never been one of those guys who wanted to see it again, honestly. I want to see Masvidal take on Colby Covington way more than I want to see him. If Masvidal beats Usman, I would much rather see Masvidal defend that belt against Leon Edwards or against Colby Covington than I would have him fight Nate Diaz. That just wouldn't even make sense at all. The other guy he mentioned was Wonderboy Thompson. That was an interesting call out. Masvidal wants to avenge his loss to Wonderboy. That's, I guess, the competitor in him. He said he has a ton of respect for Wonderboy. I mean, who doesn't? He's one of the nicest guys in the UFC, without a doubt. Just a gem of a human being and a hell of a fighter. He beat Masvidal back in the day. Masvidal wants revenge. So he called out Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, who's right now, I think he's ranked 6th at welterweight. So I thought that was a very interesting call out. So Masvidal calls out Diaz and Thompson by name. Nobody else. I thought that was very interesting. Another interesting thing that he said on Ariel Helwani's show was that, oh, by the way, as regards to his contract, he signed a multi-fight contract. So Masvidal has signed a multi-fight extension. So we will be seeing him back in there after he fights Usman, win or lose. So, the last really big thing that stuck out to me was Ariel asked him what kind of shape, what kind of training Masvidal has been doing, because of course he didn't have a fight scheduled until over the weekend. So he said he never stopped training, he's always training, but he's not always in the gym doing the specifics, he said. He believes that he will be in adequate shape to fight this coming Saturday. At the time of the interview, which I believe was yesterday, no, it was Saturday or Sunday, when he was on with Ariel, he said he was weighing about 192, so of course he'll have to cut about a little over 20 pounds to get down to that weight over the week. It's definitely doable. So he said, this is what worried me a little bit if you're a betting man and you're planning to bet on Masvidal. He said, if you're asking me, are you in shape? Maybe not to fight Ben Askren. I'm not in Ben Askren's shape because he's a hell of a wrestler. Or even to fight a guy like Darren Till. But I am in shape for this bum I'm about to dissipate and baptize. Hell yeah. That's what Masvidal said. Now, bum, he's referring to the welterweight champ, Kamaru Usman. Now, you can label Kamaru a bunch of things, I guess, but bum, I would never label Kamaru Usman. If you watch how he ragdolled Tyron Woodley, and then his great performance, warrior-like performance against Colby Covington, his bitter rival, in his last fight. So a bum is not something I would call Kamaru Usman. And, God, if you think Masvidal thinks he's not in shape to fight Askren or Till, but he's in shape to fight Usman, who's, let's be honest, far scarier than Till or Askren. And he labeled Ben Askren a hell of a wrestler, which is true. You know who else is a hell of a wrestler? Kamaru Usman. You know who's very big and strong? Kamaru Usman. So Masvidal worried me with that statement, talking about how he's not in Ben Askren or Darren Till shape, but he's in shape for Kamaru. Because Kamaru can go 25 minutes like it's nothing. We've seen that. He's proven that. I think Masvidal can go deep into fights too. I think he can go 25 minutes if he's in really good shape. But if you got a guy like Kamaru, who is going to come out, I think, test the waters on the ground, or on the feet rather, with Masvidal, who's a better striker, more experienced striker, but I think Kamaru is going to end up wrestling this dude and getting him to the ground. Similar to what a Ben Askren would have wanted to do if he didn't get kneed into another dimension. And wrestling tires you. So Masvidal better be ready for that. If he thinks this fight is just going to be a kickboxing match, I think he's dead wrong. I think Kamaru's going to get in there into the clinch, make this dirty, and really wear on this guy. And if Masvidal isn't in the right shape, I think it's really going to affect this fight for him. Usman is not the guy you want to come into a fight not being in the best of shape. You got to be at your peak shape, and you still might not beat him. You saw that with Covington. So that worried me a little bit if you're a fan or a betting man betting on Masvidal for this Saturday. Not saying that he can't beat Usman, because the run that Masvidal's on is just, it's movie-like. So, and this would be just another chapter to this crazy run. If he was to take this fight against Usman on about a week's notice and take down one of the scariest champions in the sport right now, honestly, you got to put Usman up there. It would just be another chapter to this wild run. So I wouldn't be surprised if Masvidal wins. Honestly, I think this is a very intriguing fight. It is more of a striker versus grappler, but Usman has shown the ability. You saw that in his last fight against Covington. That was largely 99% just on the feet, trading, and he handled himself very well. Not saying I think Masvidal is a better striker than Covington. I think that's obvious, which is why I think Usman will test those waters early and see what he likes, what he doesn't like. And if he's not feeling it, I think he's going to end up trying to get this thing to the ground, into the clinch, and take Masvidal down. And I think he'll have a lot of success if he ends up doing that, because I think he's going to be in better shape. I think he's going to be stronger in those exchanges. And I just think he's better fighter when the fight goes to those places. I really do. So, speaking of short notice title fights, the UFC is no stranger to short notice title fights. They've had some notable ones, and it seems like the UFC really does excel and persevere when their back is up against the wall. When the UFC when option A goes out the window, they are ready, they are prepared for it, and they move on to option B, and it usually really ends up being a memorable moment. UFC 196. UFC 196 didn't start out as McGregor versus Diaz. This took place back in 2016. So if anybody forgot, the main event, once McGregor was slotted into that main event, he was supposed to take on RDA, Rafael dos Anjos, who he still never fought. That was supposed to be the fight. And then RDA pulled out because of an injury that he suffered in camp. And Nate Diaz was not even option B. He was not. Option B was Jose Aldo. They were going to try and get Jose Aldo as that weight replacement. However, he just said that he didn't have enough time, he wouldn't be ready for it, so he didn't take the fight. Option C was not Nate Diaz. It was Frankie Edgar. He declined the fight due to a groin injury. So then option D was Nathan Diaz. And the rest is just history. Option D proved to be the best option. And it's crazy to say option D was better than options C, B, and A. And the rest is history. Diaz finished McGregor in the second round of that fight, and it led to the rematch. And it's just really a famous rivalry. One of the most famed rivalries in the history of the UFC, McGregor and Diaz. They're running out of time for that rubber match too, by the way. I thought that they could have gotten that done at some point early on this year. Didn't happen. But there's still time for that rubber match. I think that makes more sense than does a rematch between Masvidal and Diaz. So, another short notice, a legendary moment in the UFC as it pertains to a title fight. Not too long after UFC 196, you got UFC 199, Rockhold versus Bisping 2. Just a legendary moment in the sport. So Bisping took this fight on 17 days' notice. The event UFC 199 was supposed to be a rematch between Luke Rockhold and Chris Weidman. However, Weidman pulled out. He had a herniated disc, I think, in his back or neck. So, again, Bisping was not even option B. Option B was Jacare. Jacare Souza was option B. He couldn't do it, though. So, option C was then Michael Bisping. And this was a rematch. The two, Rockhold and Bisping, had already fought. Rockhold submitted Bisping early on in the fight, in the second round of that fight, which is probably a large reason why Bisping wasn't option B to replace Weidman. But they went to him, and Bisping, you know what happened in that one. Yeah, you know what happened in that one. Bisping with one of probably the highlight of his career in what was a Hall of Fame career. One more I'm going to throw at you. UFC 223. This one doesn't get brought up a ton. So UFC 223 was supposed to be Khabib versus Tony. And, of course, that fight fell apart as it always does. So UFC 223 was supposed to be Khabib Tony. That fell apart. Then the replacement was going to be, Tony pulled out due to an injury in that one. So the replacement was going to be Khabib versus Max Holloway. Which would have been a hell of a fight. Imagine that matchup. However, Holloway couldn't fight because he was deemed medically unfit. It was unfortunate, but necessary. He could not fight. So, Anthony Pettis was up next. However, that got scrapped. So, after Holloway, after Pettis, and after the original Ferguson, the UFC moved to Al Iaquinta on a day's notice to take on Khabib. And Al gave Khabib one of probably his toughest fight of his career on a day's notice. He deserves a ton of credit for that fight, still does to this day. Iaquinta was originally supposed to take on Paul Felder in the co-main event of that card. So they just moved him up, and he ended up going the distance with the undefeated Khabib. Really impressive. Circling back, one thing that really doesn't get a whole lot of attention in these circumstances is a lot. Alright, let me just take a quick break to tell you guys about our sponsor, Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's an app available to download on your computer, iPhone, or Android, and it's the easiest way to make a podcast. For starters, it's free. Everything's free on Anchor, and it gives you all kinds of tools that allow you to record and edit and create your very own podcast right from your computer or phone. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, man, how do I get my podcast out to the people? Well, Anchor even distributes your podcast on all the biggest platforms such as Spotify and Apple Music. You can even profit from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Anchor is everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Go download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today. A lot of times, most of the time, all the credit goes to the guy who's taking the fight on short notice. So Bisping gets all the credit for taking that fight and knocking out Rockhold. Iaquinta gets that credit for going 25 minutes with Khabib on a day's notice after preparing for Felder, and all that's rightfully so. Masvidal is getting all the credit right now for taking this fight, being game bred, living up to his nickname, and he deserves that. However, Kamaru Usman deserves a ton of credit as well, because Kamaru is right in this with everybody else. The uncertain circumstances of the COVID, having to get tested, people are coming up positive. You saw Pedro Munoz come up positive. That was yesterday, I think, or the day before. So Usman really does deserve credit. This is his second title defense, and with all the uncertainty, his opponent changing from a teammate. I wrote an article about this that will be posted on Bat Sports page probably today or tomorrow. So Usman went from fighting a guy who was a friend and a teammate in Gilbert Burns, thinking all along that's going to be the fight, to a week prior to the event, it getting switched to somebody who he despises in Masvidal. That's going to affect your mindset going into this fight. Usman is a very, very strong, mentally tough guy. It's tough to shake him mentally, for sure. But even the most mentally tough, mentally strong guys is going to head into this fight with a little bit of a different mindset. When he steps in, and it's not Burns who's across the octagon from him, it's Jorge Masvidal taunting him. That's going to affect your mindset a little bit. Whoever it is. It just is. So he deserves credit. I want to see him get that credit, especially if he wins this fight. I'd like to see. I don't want to see people put an asterisk next to that one because Masvidal took the fight on short notice. It doesn't matter in a lot of cases. You see the performances that guys on short notice deliver. Nate Diaz beat Conor. Bisping beat Rockhold. Iaquinta almost beat Khabib. So it's tough for both guys in these short notice fights. It really is. Both guys deserve credit for that. Before I sign off, I just want to end with giving a shout out and saying rest in peace to Khabib's dad. Very unfortunate. He had a long-standing fight with COVID, just 57 years old. And I know Khabib is very, very close to his dad. His dad is a large reason why he started fighting and why he continues to fight. I lost my dad a couple years ago. I know how tough it can be. I know it's going to be incredibly tough for Khabib, who is scheduled essentially to fight Justin Gaethje in September. And of course his dad would have been right there with him the whole way, the camp, going into the fight, and after the fight, and now he won't be. However, I expect Khabib to persevere in this situation, because it's just who Khabib is. To talk about mentally tough, that fight with McGregor, Khabib showed a little bit of weakness when he jumped out of the cage, and he didn't handle his emotions. But the way he performed in that fight with Conor after all that shit going into it, the incident with the bus, of course, all the trash talk that really cut Khabib pretty deep, that McGregor was throwing at him, and the way that he just did his thing. And Khabib is so mentally tough. I expect him to overcome this, what probably is the greatest challenge in his life thus far, and I expect him to perform and do it for his dad. I really do. I don't think it will break Khabib. I think it'll make him. I think he will get stronger from this. It just seems to me the type of person he is. Despite the very close relationship he had with his father, I'm sure he's mourning. I'm sure he's devastated. But I am also sure that I really am pretty sure that he is going to prevail. And yeah. So I just want to wrap things up now. I thought it was a good episode. A lot of good stuff came out this weekend. Craziness with this sport. And UFC 251, Fight Island. Didn't even get into the other fights. It's a great card. Gonna talk about that on Thursday or Friday. There's still a lot to get into with this card. And somehow, it went from option A to option B, and it's better. It doesn't happen often, but it seems to happen often with the UFC. They keep doing things right, and I am appreciative as a fan of the sport. I really am. So follow me on Bat Sports page. Got UFC articles coming out a couple times a week there. Check this podcast out. You can find it on YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts, really. And I appreciate the support. Hope you guys have a good couple of days, and I will be back on with another episode Thursday or Friday. Take care.